We are at chapter 25. Will had no idea that his superiors had decided to send help to him and Alice. The pigeon that had carried his report was the only one that had learned the route between Norgate Fief and Castle Arelin, so it was the only one that could carry a reply back to him, and it would take 3 or 4 days before it would recover sufficient strength to undertake another journey. Then, of course, he would return to its last resting place with Alice's men some distance from the castle. Until Will made contact with him, he would be unaware that help was on its way. Had he known, he might have felt a little more secure. Horace was only one man, but he had proved his worth many times over. As an apprentice, he had been an extraordinarily talented warrior, a natural, as his teachers put it. He had defeated the rebel warlord Morgarth in single combat, and later had served with great distinction in the Scandinavian War against the Temujin riders. In addition, he had earned a fearsome reputation for his skill in single combat. The name of the Oakleaf Knight was still spoken with awe throughout Gallica. His exploits were such that King Duncan had no hesitation in formally knighting him before he had completed half the allotted time for his apprenticeship. So the news that Horace was on his way might well have counteracted the unease Will felt on this bright winter morning. Still mulling over the conversation in the barracks room, he planned to see Alice as soon as he could for a reasonable excuse to talk it over with her. Already he was half inclined to seek assistance from Sir Kieran. After all, the young garrison commander was obviously not close to his cousin, and he had an independent armed force at his command, which could prove valuable. But before Will could take such a radical step, he would have to discuss it with Alice. He was also keen to set a time when they might further investigate the mysterious milkman, for he must be the one behind the lights, the images, and the attempts to discourage visitors to Grimsdale Wood. But before any of the above steps could be taken, he needed to contrive a way to have Alice send for him. As a lowly juggler, he could hardly barge in on a lady's quarters uninvited. In the meantime, he had gone to the stables to make sure Tug was well cared for, and since the dog was beginning to fret in Will's confined and somewhat stuffy castle quarters, he had taken her to the stable to keep Tug company. Both animals seemed content with the arrangement when he left them together. Tug had adopted an amused, superior attitude to the dog, while she, in her turn, seemed to accept the shaggy little ranger horse as a reasonable substitute for Will himself. The dog wouldn't stray, he knew, but there was plenty in the way of strange new scents and noises and odd corners to keep her occupied in the castle stables. It was as well he left her there. As he was crossing the courtyard, a vaguely familiar figure left the gatehouse, striding towards the central keep. He was a tall man with dark hair and beard, and from a distance Will couldn't make out his features, but the way he moved, the way he held himself was familiar, as was the heavy war spear he carried in his right hand, hefting it easily in spite of its considerable weight. After a few seconds' hesitation, Will made the connection in his mind. John Buttle, the man he had left with the Scandinavian crew in faraway Seacliff Fief. What the devil was he doing here? Will muttered to himself. Hastily he turned away and dropped to one knee, pretending to fasten a strap on his boot, but fortunately Buttle wasn't looking in his direction. He entered the keep and Will straightened, his mind racing. By now Buttle should have been safely ensconced on Scordril with the Scandinavian crew, hundreds of kilometres to the northeast, and well out of the way. But his turning up here was a real problem. After all, he had heard the conversation between Will and Alice, and he knew that. He stopped in mid-thought. Alice. If Buttle were to see her, he could easily recognize her. Of course, he reasoned, her hairstyle and clothes were more elaborate now, as befitted a titled lady. When Buttle had last seen her, she had been wearing the simple but elegant courier's robe, and her long hair had been down, but Alice was a striking figure, and, given enough time, he might remember her. If he did, he would know she was not the empty-headed Lady Gwendolen, but a diplomatic service courier. Whether he might recognize Will was a moot point. He wouldn't look to see him in the bright, garish clothes of a juggler. He knew Will was a ranger, and he would expect to see him in dull-coloured plain ranger garb. as Holt had taught him. People tend to look for what they expect to see. Besides, the light had been uncertain in the shadows by the door where they had fought. But once he recognized Alice, it would be only a matter of time before he made the connection to the other stranger in the castle. Will's first step was clear then. He had to warn Alice immediately. She would simply have to keep out of sight until they had sorted out this awkward new development. He started towards the keep door, then hesitated. Buttle had gone through there, and Will had no idea where he might be now. He might be just inside, in the small hall, or he might even be coming back out again. Will looked around for an alternative entrance to the keep. The kitchens, he knew, opened out into the rear of the courtyard. He'd go that way. Before he could move, a heavy hand fell on his shoulders. He turned and found himself looking into the stern face of the sergeant major. 2 other members of the garrison stood close by, their hands on their weapons. There was no sign of the previous evening's friendliness. The 3 men were all business. "Just a moment, juggler," the sergeant major said. "Lord Ormond wants a word with you." Will sized up the situation. The sergeant major was old and slow-moving, albeit an experienced warrior, and the other 2 were merely men-at-arms. Their weapon skills weren't likely to be too advanced. He was confident he could deal with at least 2 of them before they could draw their weapons, but that would still leave one to the sound alarm, and the gate house and drawbridge were 30 meters away and manned by another 3 or 4 armed men. He'd never get out of the castle if he tried to fight now. The only thing he could do was try to bluff it out. He made this assessment in approximately half a second. "Very well, Sir Major," he replied, smiling. "I'll drop in on him when I finish my errand. The hand didn't budge from his shoulders. "Now," the sergeant said firmly, and Will shrugged. "Of course, now is convenient for me as well," he said. "Lead the way." He gestured for the soldier to go ahead of him, but the older man stood firm. His eyes were unamused. "After you, juggler," he said. Will gave what he hoped was an unconcerned shrug and led the way across the courtyard. The 3 soldiers fell into place around him, the sergeant major behind him and the other 2 flanking him on either side. Their heavy boots rang on the cobbles as they approached the door. Will breathed a silent prayer that they wouldn't encounter Buttle on his way out. A man being so obviously escorted would be bound to draw attention, and if Buttle looked closely, he might well recognize him, juggler's clothes or no. Fortunately, there was no sign of his former prisoner as they entered. The sergeant major propped him with a hard, blunt object. Will realized that he had drawn the heavy mace he wore on his belt, and they headed for the stairs to Ormond's room. As was the fashion, the stairs curved to the right, so that an attacker fighting his way upwards would have to expose his entire body to use his sword, while a defender above him could strike with only his right arm and side exposed. He could hear the sergeant major beginning to breathe heavily behind him as they went upwards, and the 2 flanking them had to fall behind on the narrow stairway. He could easily sprint away from here, he realized, but the question remained, where could he go? Once again, he decided to bide his time for a better opportunity. Once he tried to escape, he knew any chance of pretending innocence was gone. He decided to wait until his chances of success were better. Here, in the heart of Ormond's castle, with armed men behind him and nowhere to go but upwards, those chances didn't look too bright. They reached Ormond's 4th-floor suite of rooms. Will hesitated at the door to the anteroom, but the mace propped him once more. "Go on in," the sergeant major's grim voice ordered him, and with no choice but to obey, Will did as he was told. Xander was at his table in the anteroom. He looked up as they entered without knocking. If he was surprised to see the minstrel being escorted by 3 armed men, he gave no sign of it. He held up a hand, motioning them to stop, then stepped out from behind the paper-laden table and opened the door to the inner office. Will heard his quiet voice. The men have brought Barton, my lord," he said. There was an indistinct mumble from inside the room, and he bowed his head quickly and emerged, motioning for the sergeant major and Will to enter as he opened the door wider. The man propped Will in the back again. That little habit was starting to annoy him, and he was tempted to take the weapon from the sergeant major and do a little prodding of his own, but he resisted the urge. Truth be told, he was curious to know what Ormond wanted from him, and as long as he didn't summon more guards, Will was confident he could effect an escape at any time he chose. Ormond was behind his own work table. Will noticed the books on magic were still among his papers, one of them lying open as a page marked with a leather bookmark. Ormond was wearing his usual dark robe, and he seemed to be hunched over in the large wooden armchair. He moved awkwardly as he waved Xander out, almost as if he was in pain. His voice, when he spoke, confirmed the impression. He seemed to form words with difficulty, and his breathing was heavy and laboured. "Well done, Sergeant Major. Any trouble from him?" "None, sir. Came right peacefully, peaceably," the soldier announced. Ormond nodded slowly. Good, good, he muttered to himself. There was a pause as he breathed heavily. Then he flicked the fingers of one hand at the Sergeant Major in a gesture of dismissal. "Very well, Sergeant Major, you can leave. You can leave us. Wait outside, please." The old soldier hesitated. "Are you sure, my lord?" he asked uncertainly. "The prisoner may try to—" He stopped in mid-sentence. He wasn't sure what Will might do. In fact, he wasn't even sure that he was a prisoner. He had been ordered to take 2 men and go fetch him here right away, and so he had assumed that there was trouble brewing. Now, as Ormond dismissed him, he began to wonder if this was simply a social matter, and he remembered with some concern the prodding he had been doing all the way up the stairs. "It's all right, go." Ormond's voice was a low whisper, but the tone of annoyance was clear in it. He was definitely in pain, Will thought. He heard the soldier come to attention behind him, then his boots as he marched to the door. He paused there, still unsure of the situation. "I'll wait outside there, my lord," he said, then added, "with my men." Yes, do that if you choose," Ormond told him. The door closed as the Sergeant Major went out. Ormond rose awkwardly, favouring his left side. Will could see now that his left arm was held close to his side, almost as if he was suffering from broken ribs. He winced as he moved around the table and stood before Will. His breath came heavy, as if moving that short distance was an enormous effort for him. Will started towards him. "Lord Ormond, are you all right?" he said, but Ormond held up a hand to stop him. "No, as you can see, I'm not, but there's little you can do about it." "Are you wounded?" Will asked. "I can send for your physician." Physician. But Ormond was shaking his head, and a harsh laugh escaped his lips. "I doubt that any healer in this castle could help with what I have," he said. "No, I need help of another kind." He paused, and his eyes burned into Will's as he added, "I need the sort of help a ranger might give me." Oh, look at that. He's figured it out. Oh my gosh. Anyway, I'd like to thank you very much for listening to read up to chapter 25. If you'd like to listen to me read chapter 26, then please stay posted and hopefully I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.